Good afternoon and welcome to this different time for a webinar Zoom conversation with an artist that we believe is important to talk with today. My name is David Ross, and I'm on the faculty of the curatorial practice program at the School of Visual Arts. I also run the art practice, the MFA in art practice at the School of Visual Arts. And it's my pleasure to continually host these weekly presentations. Today we are going to be talking with Ahmet Öğüt, who is an artist who works in various parts of the world, between New York and Berlin and Istanbul. Today he is in Istanbul, actually in a German residency program. And so he's actually in the German consulate, I believe, in Istanbul now, which kind of complicated layers. Anyhow, for the next hour or so, we'll hear from Ahmet, and if you have any questions you want, and put them in the Q&A below, I will try to get to them before we run out of time. After that hour, then we will revert to the private Zoom for the graduate students in the curatorial practice program. Hi, Ahmet, great to see you. I'm really glad you could be with us today.
Hi, David. Great to see you too.
Yeah. So take over the screen, and the floor is yours, as they say.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to meet you online today, hopefully in person soon. I would like to do a general presentation today. My practice is now over 20 years, and I've been always around. This time I happen to be in Istanbul, in the German territory. Actually, I'm in a residency here as a German artist, but I'm officially Dutch and originally Kurdish. Grow up in Turkey, and I've been in exhibitions representing Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean artists of all kinds. So I'm just confusing minds, and I think how it should go.
Layers.
Lots of layers, and these layers of confusion maybe gives more space for the art that I want to share, especially with local audiences. So I'm going to show you examples of all kinds of versions of Ahmet from the past till today, and different hats I'm wearing as an artist, and also as well as a social cultural initiator and mentor, and many other things. So I'm going to share screen right now and start with an early piece, very early piece. This is work all the way back from 2005. Very much it marks the beginning for me when I started participating in biennials, and this was actually I participated in my first biennial, which was in Istanbul, and then I have participated 2 more times into Istanbul Biennial. So I'm very much connected with the local scene here, and this was very much the beginning. It was a type of work, an intervention on the streets. I go to the cars I pick cars without getting permission from the owners, and transform them into using very basic material like cardboard and tape into Istanbul taxi and into a police car. So the civilian cars transform within minutes into this other non-civil objects in public space. And for me, what is important with this piece is basically I didn't have invitations when I started my practice. I didn't start with invitations. I didn't start with the museum space. Basically, public space was my museum, White Cube. And I just did what I would like to do in public space without needing to have big budgets. So I tried to keep the spirit throughout my practice, throughout my career over many years. And later, over the years, I was commissioned to do site-specific projects many times, and even almost didn't have time to initiate my own projects at some point, and I was trying to do this kind of works that doesn't cost anything, that doesn't require an invitation or an application. So it was very important for me to keep that spirit alive, and I always go back to this work when I think of that side and aspect of my practice. Giving another type of work as an example, a few years later, in 2008 in Berlin Biennial, I did this installation, which was basically a very minimalist conceptual piece in respect to all those minimalist pieces from 70s. And I filled the floor of Kunstwerke, this main space for the Biennial back then, and still it's the main location for the Biennial in Berlin, with asphalt. So this white space was filled with asphalt that comes from outdoors, but basically we also talk with the curators and they agree with me not to hang any other works, any other artworks on the walls or on top of the piece. So people would come and arrive to this pure looking place, but then as soon as they arrive, asphalt would tarmac would interact with them by sticking to their shoes and smelling and all these invisible sides of this very high costly piece actually. I did the same piece in Istanbul in a year before, and it was we were able to install it in one day. It didn't cost anything. We got a sponsor, and they sent a truck, and the workers did it in 3 hours. On the contrary, in Germany, it took weeks and a lot of calculations and a lot of cost. So even a simple idea, when it changes in context, it's also the way it's done can completely change as well. So it was rather more political piece in Turkey, and it was more maybe a conceptual piece in Germany. We can talk about this if you like later. And another project I did was when I was in Arizona. I was invited for a research residency, short research residency, and I went down to Tucson, where there is this famous airplane graveyard, military airplane graveyard, and I did film this video back then, and all happening is here. Probably internet doesn't allow to show it smoothly, but if you like, I can send you the link to watch it later. So basically, you see thousands of planes in the middle of the desert and well protected and never going to be used because they're from the past wars, from Vietnam, from Iraq War, and all these wars. But they never functioned in this territory where they were actually produced, and they were sent far away and returned home where they were never really functioning as destruction vehicles, destruction machines, basically. So I wanted to show this contrast, them being alone in the middle of desert and never going to be used, but somehow protected. And all is happening that these planes are being counted by a voice in 3 different languages, in Turkish, in Kurdish, and in English, for a reason I can explain later if you like. But I did a lot of short video works back then as well. They were in between commissioned pieces and the pieces that I could do by myself. This was another commissioned piece in 2009 when I was representing Turkey. I did it for the Pavilion of Turkey. This is an image from Berkeley Art Museum when we showed it some years later in Berkeley. It's a piece was specifically designed for the atmosphere in Venice, when it's very international. I wanted to deal with the recent memory of all the international community that comes there. And each building here, the project called Exploded City, it's inspired from Italo Calvino's very famous book, Invisible Cities. And I wanted to add one more city to this book, as if it's written by Italo Calvino and the story is told by Marco Polo. These are the buildings that were attacked after the last 20 years at a time. It was 2008, 2009, I did this piece. So 20 years back, beginning of 90s, when the war in Yugoslavia started. I think the earliest building is the tower from Vukovar, from Croatia, and which you can see in the back. And then there's the Europa Hotel from Belfast, and there Oklahoma. There's Oklahoma Federal Building from US. So from all around the world, the buildings that are very well known after the attacks. But they were not so much known. They were mostly ordinary buildings before these attacks, before being venues of this traumatizing events. So there's the Future TV building from Beirut, or Ferhadiye Mosque from Bosnia, and library from Sarajevo, and HSBC Bank building from Istanbul, and Madımak Hotel building from Sivas, Turkey, and Otesian School from Russia, and all kinds of specific buildings. Actually, they were only recognized and possible to recognize by the locals from those countries. So this work kind of works in many different dimensions. Depends who is looking from where and where they come from. It gets different meanings. And I try to imagine a kind of future city fitting the concept of the book, Invisible Cities, that comes from the future, and everybody knows there will be big disasters, but yet they try to build an everyday life around it as a kind of international, very diverse community, and so on, and how an everyday life will be possible in such atmosphere. So it's quite a poetic text that comes from, together with this very dry-looking archive of buildings. They were venues for these traumatic incidents. This was one of my first short-term research projects. So I started with public interventions and doing conceptual installations, and then eventually started doing short-term research projects, and then long-term ones and lifetime projects. And I always went back and forth to those intervention projects, quick ideas, and public space, always. But it really involved in some projects I will show in a bit, into lifetime project and long-term project as well. These are different installs of the same piece. I also experiment with the exhibition spaces, so context is everything, and I try to play with the dimensions and the scales many times. This is another commissioned piece I did in 2011. In New Zealand. It was called Waiting for a Bus. Basically, you had this bus station that turns 24 hours non-stop, and people could go and wait for a bus anytime they want, and it turns very slow. So while waiting for the bus, they're turning. So it's kind of, I wanted to create a social space for people, not only for like a passive activity, but also kind of becoming a community with a little minor gesture. Although it was a work that comes with humor, which is an important part of my practice, there was a big disaster. So this was one of my first experience when I dealt with especially natural disasters within the context of my work. You know, you design a work thinking of completely something else, and suddenly a natural disaster comes and hits. And sometimes wars and other disasters happens as well. And you might end up having your work in the middle of this chaos. So just a few days before I go, they produced the work. There was a big earthquake in Christchurch, and then of course the whole show was postponed, and this facade of the church behind, for instance, was completely damaged. So even the offices of the biennial was damaged, so we couldn't even hear for quite a long time. 6 months later, they wanted to open the show finally, and then again another earthquake happened. So twice I only went there for site visit before the earthquake, but I wasn't able to go back because of this. Twice I was almost there during the earthquake, and still I told the institution, because the work was inspired from, you know, this very passive city, almost like a copy of a British town all the way in New Zealand. Down there, I was thinking like public space, and the city itself doesn't look that real, but after the earthquake, everything changed. So I was telling them maybe the work does not make sense anymore, although they believe that the work is even better moment for this kind of work to reclaim the public space, reinvent the public space, and really keep, especially the younger generation in town. They were all kind of leaving after the earthquake to the other towns, and they installed the work for like another 2 years. So it wasn't anymore a biennial, but it was really like about reinventing the public space after such disaster. This is another work, like it was also meant to be a kind of symbolic gesture that's added to the cityscape in Ghent, in Belgium, and another city that looked very, you know, western city and Western Europe, and you know, I didn't imagine any kind of crisis there. I made a resemblance and a helium balloon that kind of get inspired from the René Magritte's very famous painting, a mysterious castle painting, floating castle. And this is called the Castle of Voorhout. Voorhout is a building. Basically, it was actually right next to this piece, which was a socialist corporation that functioned and run by the people of the town in Ghent, in Belgium, over almost 100 years. When I was doing site visit, I noticed the building, and there's a text, it says Voorhout on it with a specific font and written with bricks, which I actually saw recently. I visited again in New York. There is a building in Lower East Side. It says Forward. It's the same organization. So Voorhout was an example. It was its own first kind, a socialist corporation, bringing those two ideas together, and it was functioning such a long time. So people were visiting the town to see how this new example of cooperation combining socialist ideas can work. And I thought it would be fun to basically replace the mysterious castle with a replica of Voorhout building and put this balloon in public space. What happened that this work was shut down at least 3 times. So it was shut down with rifles and bullets. And even the museum was surprised with this first version of the action. They thought it was a storm, and then we found out the balloon was down after you know, an attack. And yet they didn't think it is a systematic thing, so they just fixed it and put it up there. And then again, same thing happened in Belgium at least 3 times. So we couldn't really properly show the work. So it was really violent response to this piece. Yet you can actually fix it, and I showed it in many other places. And this is when I showed it in Berlin near May Day, and we didn't have an incident, for instance, in Berlin with that piece. Coming to the year 2013, which is a very special year. Now I'm back in Istanbul. I remember that was the year of uprising, Gezi uprising, and it was also the same year the biennial was supposed to happen, and biennial did happen a few months later, the uprising, but all the public space projects were cancelled because it was almost impossible to take permission from the government to do any kind of art in public space. So I was invited to do a performance during the biennial opening. So I invited all these people to this terrace, and I was opposite side at the Galata Tower, which is a historical tower, used to be the highest point of Istanbul. And I went there together with all the tourists queuing, and got a ticket, went up there, and I was already standing there opposite to this terrace. And people came looking for me. They couldn't see me, but they see this one man standing there with binoculars, and he was Özgür, and he was the only lip reader, somebody who invented that job in Turkey professionally. And he started a federation of lip readers. He was the only one, and we asked his help that he can translate my try to lip read me from the opposite tower. So I didn't use any speakers. And I was talking about my 5 different works, including the balloon piece that was attacked, stolen, and so on, had unexpected stories. So because I did a lot of works in public space, I had all kinds of stories, attacks, censorships. Even though a lot of works are easy to approach, these stories can happen. So I wanted to make give a lecture without using a microphone or speaker, and through Özgür would translate, try to lip read me and tell whatever he understands. So it was kind of a lost in translation performance, and maybe 50% of the information I was telling opposite side was transferred to the people. So I also like to play with the notion of public space, and also even the very format of lectures, giving lectures. There are some other pictures from there. I think every existing format has a potential to reverse or really bring in the questions that we don't even question, we think it's given. Like this project, I was invited to do a project during Art Dubai, and they wanted an educational project, and I was thinking in 3 days that's something kind of impossible, or it's kind of it doesn't necessarily naturally make sense. So in an environment when everybody focusing on the art fair atmosphere, and how can we transfer knowledge in such environment? So I asked if they have interns, and they said they have quite many interns, unpaid interns, and they don't have a common space. So when I find out they don't have common space, I decided to create another VIP lounge, which is an inter VIP lounge for only interns. And because Art Dubai already had 3 different VIP lounges. One was Cartier and Abraj VIP lounge. They even had hierarchies among them. So I thought, why not to create a 4th one which prioritized the interns. And galleries and collectors are not allowed to enter, and the only people who are allowed to enter to give talks in the space, professional artists and curators will give talks to the interns, but they can actually have a fun space. They can have chocolate fountain and snacks and free internet and really relax there. Meanwhile, they can watch the video program we created that's focusing on art and the workspace and office space and artworks that are focusing on the subjects. They would be free to follow that, or just relax there, or follow the presentations if they want. And later, this gesture turned into rather long-term thing. I was invited to do it at Centre Pompidou, and we had this time 3 months, and we extended the invitation. All the interns in Paris who can come and register and use the space, and the space was decorated with never seen artworks from the museum collection, which wasn't even surprising, which I asked. Actually, I did that with many museums. I ask often, like, if they can give me the list of never seen artworks from their collection. And in Pompidou there were hundreds of them, and we picked 50 of these works. Nobody knows how they even enter and when they entered the collection, but there was quite interesting pieces, and furniture from the director's room. So we decorated this intern VIP lounge for the local artists and interns to come and use. We collaborated also Precarious Generation, which is a collective. We changed all the policy in France. Before this collective, interns were unpaid, but after that, they recently, before this launch project, changed the policy that all the interns were supposed to be paid and have to be paid during the time they work with institutions. And so I always think about all these other positions. I did a lot of collaborations, not only with other artists, but also people from other professions. And in this case, it was with a group of firemen. And it was I realized this project in Finland, and we work with a local group of firemen. And I asked them if we can do what is happening in this dystopian movie and the book Fahrenheit 451, instead of burning books in this dystopian future, the people, firemen who goes around and people are not allowed to, they're not allowed to read books, and they enter the houses and find wherever they find the books, they burn them. So my proposal was to print books. If the firefighters can learn how to print books, and we work with an undergrad publisher, and I made a list of censored books for actually quite random reasons and ironic reasons. And through that list, we did scans of the original books with copyright permissions, and firefighters could print those books on the spot for the public in Helsinki. There's a little video here, but we won't be able to watch it properly, so you can find it online later. Continue, let me check the time. Okay, very good. This is another piece, this time come as a kind of modular sculpture. And this was focusing on the notion of nail houses. Nail house is a house that the owner refused to sell when a government or a big corporation come and try to buy or reconstruct the entire neighborhood. And it often happens that one or single owner refuse for sometimes sentimental reasons, personal reasons, or money reasons and other reasons, they refuse to sell their house. So what happens that the construction starts and you end up with this one single house right in the middle, standing. And these are examples, mostly in China, actually, but there are a couple in, there's one in Seattle, also in US, and also there was one in Istanbul, which was the neighborhood I used to live. This one is from Zurich, this example. So I started making, again, a three-dimensional archive of this individual resistance to larger scale corporations and the state, and it's kind of these houses disappear. Sometimes they stay up to 3 years in the spot, and then eventually conflict is resolved and they are removed. This is the one from Istanbul. I continue. Every now and then I did a project in states, and as I always focus on the local important topics, I was asked to collaborate with Krzysztof Wojcicki, who is a professor, and did a lot of public art projects and worked with veterans, war veterans, and so on. And we both thought at the time, this was 2013, 2014, which was the most urgent topic to address, was the student debt in US. And as you all know, this topic way more than me, because I didn't study in US, but I know the issue, how it evolved over the years, especially pre-2013-14 period. There was an organization called Rolling Jubilee, maybe some of you might know it already, and now they are the Debt Collective, and they started as the collective called Strike Debt after the Occupy Wall Street, and they had this idea to abolish student debt by fundraising, and they turned themselves into one of those agent companies, and they could send people letters, and then they don't have to actually pay anymore, because they could buy very cheap from the banks and from the government, like the other agencies. But their aim was not to collect this money back from people, but to tell them that their loan is abolished and they don't have to pay anymore. Their project evolved later. It became turned into collective refusal. But I was thinking at the time, how can we support through artworks, through the speculative value of the artworks, especially when they go into the secondary market. I invited several artists. In this case, the first version was in US, so it was with Natasha Sadragian, Dan Perzhowski, Marta Rosler, Superflex, Krzysztof Wojcicki, who was there also. and myself, we did sculptures. And this is Marta Rosler's coin vector vortex, coin vortex, and with all the data from the time about the debt issue. And so these sculptures were coin-operated machines. They would collect money, but also they could be sold in the art market. And every time they come with a contract, I work with a lawyer, which I did several times. I did conceptual contracts. And this money, whatever, every time it's sold, if it's sold more than once, the money goes to the same activist organization, which was the Debt Collective. So we were able to exhibit this in one museum in East Lansing, and after that, it didn't unfortunately tour around US. But I did a version. I mean, my sculpture came back to me. Every sculpture was returned to the artist. So every time it was in a different group show, still each show would fundraise because each sculpture collects money at the same time. And also in the future, if these works are sold, the money goes to same organization as well. I was later asked to do the same project in the context of British Art Show in London, because UK is following US system, not compared to, not following really European system. And since I think 1998, they introduced tuition fees as well. And this was a year later in 2015, when I asked the Debt Collective, they said there's another Jubilee Debt campaign organization based in the UK, sister organization. So I collaborated with them. I invited this time Liam Gillick, Susan Hiller, and Koshka Majuka to do sculptures for this project. And British Art Show was anyway for 2 years touring exhibition around UK and Scotland and so on. And the sculptures did travel and also fundraise for several years for the UK version of the activist organization. Where are we now? Okay, I'm not too slow. That's good. Still, there's a lot to tell. This is a work. The latest version was in US in Oberlin, Ohio, as part of Cleveland Triennial, and but the first version was, let me see here, and this is the first version I did in Eindhoven in 2015. So until not this summer, last summer, the summer before, I've done many different versions in multiple countries and museums as a proposal. And then eventually it became a complete artwork after a few years. So the idea, inspiration comes from Mikhail Bakunin. According to a legend, he proposed his friends when in Dresden, when they're preparing barricades against Prussian army, he proposed them to put original artworks from the National Collection in Dresden. So in case army approaches this barricade, they might not touch or hesitate at the least to destroy the artworks, therefore not the barricade. But Bakunin's friends find the idea silly, and it never really happens, so it stays as a kind of story. Until in 2015, I proposed Bakunin's idea to Eindhoven, Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, and they agree with me to show the original artworks from the collection. So here you can see a work by Picasso, René Deliens, Marlene Dumas, Lissitzky, and so on, and Oskar Kokoschka, and with very high insurance values, and they never exhibited these works in this kind of state next to broken glass and bricks and all the junk that I installed. And then they agreed that they were the first museum to exhibit this piece. So the piece comes with a contract. So it's not just an illustration of a barricade in a museum. My idea was that in times of crisis, in the future, near future, if there's an uprising in Netherlands or in the country where the work is installed, people could come and demand this work from the museum. So the contract tells, in case the work is sold to the museum, not exhibited, but sold to the museum, people have right to come and ask for it. Of course, we need to do a very clear definition of uprising. What is an uprising? With what motivation? So I work with the museum lawyers, and we did this again conceptual contract, and the contract is based on human rights declaration. So basic human rights. If the lack of basic human rights exists in that country, and an uprising is happening based on that. And then lawyer also told me we have to put some examples of uprisings as well, and we did. I put back then Seattle uprising and Gezi uprising and so on, and then we always updated these uprisings examples every time it's exhibited. So it traveled, different variations traveled to different museums, and always with the original artworks. This one is from Cologne. This one's from Copenhagen with the collection there. And this one is from Oberlin with their collection. And here, this is also Dresden. Eventually, the work had a version in Dresden as well. And this is the one at Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. So after quite a few years, 5 years later, after the first version, the work arrived back to Netherlands and to the different museums, Stedelijk Museum. And here you can see also original artworks for Kata Kollwitz, Malevich, and Pink and Nan Goldin, and so on. This time the museum considered adding this work to the collection. So we actually reworked the contract specifically from the perspective of this museum and how they can handle this future uprising situation. And they actually signed this document. So it is officially part of right now Stedelijk Museum. So until that moment, the work was still a proposal. As Bakunin's proposal, it was always an abstract proposal, and then it became like a installation, but still a proposal. And the contract was always on the wall, but it was never signed. And with this Stedelijk edition, we were able to finalize, and it became a real artwork, complete artwork, which means it does have the potential for the future to be returned to the streets. I'm happy to talk about it further. It has, usually have long discussions around this. There are long discussions about that work. This is I was talking about the natural disasters and all these other disasters, but this one was in Fukushima. I was specifically invited to do a project within the radioactive zone inside Fukushima. But the thing was, the zone and still the part I work in is not possible to visit by humans. So the curator, there was Jason White and a Japanese collective, Chimpon, were the curators. And they asked a group of artists, I think 7 or 8 artists, to design works, also in collaboration with the local community, who used to work in the zone, now outside of the zone, but they still have houses there, and come up with site-specific artworks that won't be seen by the humans until the zone becomes accessible, maybe after 10 years or 20 years, depends on the radioactivity levels. So this show without audience was very much criticized in the beginning. Here you can see me visiting the show. We started in 2015. I went to visit in 2018. So this was one of those exhibitions that you don't have actually a stress that it will be over soon, or you need to be there at the opening and something like that. It's really an exhibition in time. It's really very smartly thoughtful exhibition that really think about the future properly. But back then we were very much some critics were thinking it's a very silly idea to do an exhibition without audience. And when COVID happened, all the museums had to shut down their doors and the exhibitions remained without having any visitors. This project has become even more up to date, and I think for me it's one of those exhibitions. It makes the most sense. What I did a collaborate with a samurai who is also a dentist. But many generations they have been samurais, and he has this 400 years old costumes in family collection, and he loaned us one of the costumes, original samurai costumes, which I combine with an hazmat suit which protects you from radioactivity. So I wanted to create a samurai costume that also protects you from radioactivity and installed in the space. Checking the town. This is another piece based on Wage, actually, partly done in US, but I might skip it. So far, you have seen multiple examples within my practice. I switched the medium based on the idea, but in this case, I wanted to make a synchronized work in Gwangju as part of the Gwangju Biennial, and also a public screen in Istanbul. Because when I was in Seoul, that was the year Korea, South Korea, and Turkey did a deal of a big tear gas shipment. And usage of tear gas was quite high in every demo, especially after the uprising, after 2013. And this work was done 2016, 2017. So it was really still a big also kind of agreements, and the people were reacting to this agreement as well. So for me, it was impossible not to make a connection when coming from Turkey and being thinking about the work in South Korea. And I just wondered, because I knew the examples when sometimes children who happen to pass by demos, or even not having anything to do with the demos, but accidentally killed or injured with tear gas canisters. I know the stories from Turkey, but I was wondering if they had similar story in South Korea, and of course they had. One of their legendary story is based on that Lee Han-yul, which became like a national hero afterwards after the regime change, because he was a university student, and pretty much the similar story happened in my hometown with a smaller kid. So these two parallel stories, that these two teenagers and kids hit by tear gas and lost their lives, and one of them became a national hero and the other remained unknown. I wanted to swap the stories, so I brought the Kurdish kid's story to the South Korea in this public screen, and wanted to bring the Korean story to the public screen in Istanbul. But just a month before that plan, that public screen that shows artworks was censored by the government, so we showed it in an exhibition space. So I did the synchronized artwork, but not in both public spaces, in an exhibition space. So I'm also interested in this parallel stories, which is often even surprisingly easy to find. There's it. I'm not sure if you can see this actually with the internet connection properly.
Yes, it's working well.
Okay, cool. It's just a little trailer of the work. I mean, they are also not portrayed as victims. The main point was that they actually tell what I learned from the forums at the time. People were teaching each other how to protect yourself from the tear gas attacks. So people had all this like chemistry knowledge, and they had all this like knowledge that they could share with each other. And the characters in good mood explaining in the animation the story to the people, how to protect yourself in the moment of those attacks. This was a monument dedicated to Ernst Schwartz, which was proposed for a temporary public installment in New York, but eventually It happened in Copenhagen and in Rotterdam, and ended up in a collection in Canada. So the work couldn't find its way to New York, but hopefully one day. But I was interested in this notion of monuments cannot be like about to be installed or taken away, this moment of being installed or taken away. So monument in motion, which is very different than a monument that dictates certain kind of ideology, you know, that stays there forever until it's forcefully removed by the people. So this became a topic later years, a bigger topic. But I was very much interested in this in-between moments, and therefore did this monument. This is another piece I did in commissioned piece I did for a triennial in Japan, in the mountains near Niigata. Let's see, there's a little GIF. You maybe see it well, I hope. This is a Toyota car, Land Cruiser, stands on two wheels by the road. So if you're a driver, you pass by, this is how you see it. You don't necessarily know it's a piece of art. I was interested, when I come up with this idea, I was interested just with the simple, again, notion of a car that's originally manufactured somewhere but didn't have and created some sort of subculture somewhere else. These cars were the first ones went to Kuwait and Middle East because it matched the landscape and it was perfect car for that landscape and function. So it got really popular over there, and very quickly it started this drifting culture in the Middle East. And but the drifting culture never happened in Japan, although the origin of this car are from Japan. So I had this idea, I installed this piece thinking of, back in my mind, the drifting culture. What happens when you put a work like that in Japan, people mostly connect it with natural disasters, of course. So people started to interact with it in a very different way than what I taught. They started playing with these cars as if they have superpowers. And then I saw all these images online, how they interact with the work. And basically, yeah, they have this incredible engineering skills. And I guess I can only construct this work in Japan because we work with a local car fixer who had a brilliant idea. So it looks like a magic when you see how it's installed. And under the ground, he creates some sort of foundation that it doesn't even need to go up above the ground. So the whole car is sitting on the two wheels, and the two wheels are holding the car, and you don't even see where is the construction coming from. So it's very well done because of the knowledge of the how to build, you know, in an environment there's constantly earthquakes. And people also combine that with this comical special powers. The way they play with these cars. So it was rather more connected with the natural disasters than the subcultures I was trying to refer, which I like, that the work finds its own way sometimes. This is another example. If you remember earlier, I showed this when I put the ceiling down. This is another work that tilts the whole entire room, you know, using this trick from 1920s to look at the artworks in a completely like uncomfortable way. Most people can't even climb through this room. We talked about exhibitions without visitors. This was also work I did just when the COVID started, crisis started, pandemic started. I was about to open an exhibition, and the work was about non-human visitors of the museums. They occupy, or sometimes they're even hired by the museum, or they claim the museum or institutions. So these are examples of those animals, various animals that they claim the art institutions, so non-human visitors basically. And I showed it in an environment. Actually, the first time I showed this work there was we had to close the exhibition without any visitors could enter because of COVID. And it was quite ironic also to show work in an environment like that. I'm running out of time.
You're still
So-
okay? 10,
Yeah,
10,
I'm about to finish. I arrived to very recent works, giving you an example of a completely digital work. So this is very much connected to the monument I show you, Aaron Schwartz monument. This version can float in the air because it's completely digital. So it's a AR piece where people can actually using the QR codes install these monuments dedicated to whistleblowers, which was done in collaboration with National Whistleblower Organization in Washington, and they could be placed anywhere around the world. So it kind of traveled all around. These are examples from screenshots for people where they installed it in multiple cities all around, and the work still travels actually. I just showed it here. Playing with the collections in multiple ways. This is another recent work where people have to jump to see the artworks. So I basically installed trampolines and hang the artworks above eye level. Did this work in a museum which was constructed after an earthquake in Skopje in 60s. So I thought it makes sense to really, instead of adjusting to people the artworks according to the humans, let's do the other way, so people actually have to activate themselves to see this artwork. I did the same project in different venues. This is the one in Berlin, with different collections, and so on. Coming towards the end, this is also something very much worked online. These are appointed curators. When I googled the two words appointed curator, these are the first picture comes. When you also search now after this talk, you will see most pictures curators do the same posture. So I didn't have to do deep research for this piece. It also later became a meme. So sometimes work travels digitally, sometimes it needs real world interaction. I'm gonna pass this one actually. You can ask me later about it, because I want to say a few words before the closure about Silent University. If you remember, I talked about long-term and lifetime projects. Silent University is one of them. It's still ongoing. It started end of 2011, beginning of 2012 in London first, in collaboration with Tate Modern and Delphina Foundation. And, and then it became an institution of itself. And it multiplied itself in many different countries and cities. Recently, we did also an event at the Bard College in upstate in May, together with two Afghani academics, undocumented academics. So the idea is to work with undocumented academics, forced migrants, displaced communities, but they have academic background back in their countries and they had jobs. But when they arrive to new countries, it's almost impossible to perform and work as academics. So with Silent University, we enable this process without legal limitations and obstacles or language limitations and obstacles. Here you can see Zainab, who did a lecture in upstate, and we are still in touch. Hopefully soon in New York, we will do an event with Zainab. Here you can see Amal and Suha, our collaborators, one from Syria, one from Sudan, in Istanbul, and actually together with Suha now got first time a visa outside with Syrian passport to Europe through Silent University. We also enable situations like that actually, because Silent University comes with its principles. It's beyond an art project. It's basically the collaboration with other institutions force the other institutions, could be an art museum or NGO or academic institutions, to fit in Silent University's principles. Otherwise, anyway, none of these academics can be paid or even involved in an academic environment properly. But through the principles of Silent University, this has been happening and it has been possible. And they also coordinate, they take over and coordinate their own branches. For instance, Bridget coordinates the Mülheim branch in Germany and so on, or Fahima coordinates the Stockholm branch in Stockholm over now over 10 years. This is quite a long story, but I wanted to briefly mention this as well. Normally, I don't show Silent University together with my other works because my role here is not an artist, but an initiator, and I make it always very clear. So I try to keep it very separate, usually lecture about this separately, but I wanted to give you a little idea about it as well. Yeah, maybe just briefly, I got just some minutes left. At the moment, showing you all these works that are circulating on internet or digitally, and most people know my works through internet over the years through my website. Even if they haven't seen any show of mine, they might have seen something online. I decided to start this new project that is completely offline. So I cannot show you the images, but as I trained as a painter at the university and I stopped painting over 20 years now, for me, it's an interesting adventure to use this medium in times of acceleration of digital agency with AI and all this. I tried to reverse the process and do this very impossible project, offline project, so people can only experience it in person. Right now, actually, in this residency, in this 5 weeks, I finished 8 paintings. They are all portraits of fictional artists. They're more than fictional. And so far I finished 25 of them. Actually, it's an ongoing, it's going to be a long-term project. I can talk about it quite a long, but I won't. Just wanted to give you a hint. And what I like about it, the difficulty it comes with it, but it's also beautiful, you know, to how to distribute and share an offline project in our times.
That's a perfect way. Thank you so much, Ahmet. This is a really wonderful presentation and very timely also. I mean, so many of your projects make even more sense in these kind of strange times that we're living through right now. I really appreciate the ways in which you push the public conception or perception of what an artist's role is in public space and in relationship to things that we all take seriously, but often really don't challenge ourselves in relationship to how seriously these issues are in terms of free speech and the ways in which works of art serve as a kind of a cultural buffer. So thank you very much for this. We will be retreating to our private web Zoom site for the conversation with the graduate students in the curatorial practice program. But again, I thank all of you who joined us this week. Next week at our normal time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be speaking with the Japanese-Brazilian painter Chie Fueki, who lives upstate New York. And I've just visited her studio recently, and I can tell you that she's been working on some rather extraordinary new paintings. So again, thank you, Ahmet. See you on the other side of the Zoom here in a few seconds. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. And see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. See you soon.